I knew my family was lying to me the moment I saw my sister wearing my grandmother's sapphire necklace at breakfast. That necklace was supposed to be mine. But what I didn't know was that the lie went so much deeper than jewelry. And by the time I figured it out, I'd already lost everything that mattered. My name is Laura Pembroke, and I grew up in a penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor. The kind of place where the chandelier in the foyer costs more than most people's houses. My father, Richard Pembroke, built a pharmaceutical empire from the ground up, and my mother, Vivian, spent her days organizing charity galas and making sure everyone knew we were old money, even though we weren't. My older sister, Natasha, was the golden child, married to a venture capitalist named Todd who wore Patagonia vests like they were formal wear and talked faced about disrupting industries over $100 bottles of wine. Me, I was the family disappointment, the one who went to art school instead of business school, who wanted to open a gallery instead of sitting on corporate boards. But I had something they didn't have, something that kept me tied to that family even when every instinct told me to run. I had a son. His name was Oliver, and he was 7 years old. And he was the only pure thing in my entire world. The morning I saw Natasha wearing Grandma Eleanor's necklace, I was sitting in the breakfast room of my parents' house, the one I'd moved back into after my divorce from Julian 2 years earlier. Julian was a mistake I'd made at 23, a charming alcoholic who worked in private equity and cheated on me with his assistant, his trainer, and according to the private investigator I'd hired. At least for other women I never got the names of. The divorce was ugly, but I got primary custody of Oliver, and that was all that mattered. What I didn't get was money. Julian's lawyers were better than mine, and somehow a man who spent $50,000 a year on bottle service walked away, paying me barely enough child support to cover Oliver's private school tuition. So I moved back home into the west wing of my parents' house, and tried to pretend I wasn't 30 years old and living with my mother again. But that necklace was supposed to be mine because Grandma Eleanor told me so. The week before she died, she'd called me to her bedroom in the estate in Newport, held my hand with her paper-thin fingers and said, "Laura, you're the only one who really sees people. You're the only one with a heart. I want you to have the sapphires." I'd cried and thanked her, and then she died 3 days later. And the will reading happened so fast I barely had time to process my grief. The necklace wasn't mentioned. Nothing was mentioned except that everything went to my father to be distributed at his discretion. At the time, I thought that was normal. Rich families do things differently, right? They don't split up estates like middle-class people do. They keep things together, keep the money working, keep the empire growing. I trusted my father. I trusted all of them, so when I saw those sapphires glittering against Natasha's collarbone as she sipped her green juice and scrolled through her phone, something cold settled in my stomach. "That's Grandma's necklace," I said. My voice came out steady, but my hands were shaking. Natasha looked up, surprised, like she'd forgotten I was even in the room. "Oh, this. Yeah, Mom gave it to me last week. It matches my new dress for the museum benefit." She said it so casually, like she was talking about a scarf she'd borrowed. "But Grandma wanted me to have it," I said. "She told me." Natasha laughed, this light, dismissive sound that made me feel like I was 10 years old again, begging to be included in her games. "Laura, come on. You know, Grandma was pretty out of it at the end. She probably told everyone they could have it. Besides, it looks better on me anyway. You never go anywhere." I wanted to throw my coffee cup at her perfect face, but I didn't. I'd learned a long time ago that showing emotion in this family was a weakness, something they'd use against you later. Instead, I stood up, left the breakfast room, and went to find my mother. I found her in her study, the room she used for planning her charity events, surrounded by fabric swatches and seating charts. "Mom, why does Natasha have Grandma's sapphire necklace?" I asked. "Grandma told me she wanted me to have it." My mother didn't even look up from her computer. "Your grandmother left everything to your father, Laura. You know that. And your father and I decided Natasha should have the necklace. She actually wears jewelry to events. You live in yoga pants." The dismissal in her voice was like a slap. I live in yoga pants because I'm raising a child by myself, I said. And I moved back here because you and Dad said you wanted to help me. That family sticks together. Now my mother looked up, and her expression was so cold it made me take a step back. We are helping you, Laura. You live here rent-free. Oliver goes to the best school in Boston. You have a trust fund that pays out every month. What more do you want? What I wanted was to matter. What I wanted was to feel like I was part of this family instead of some charity case they kept around out of obligation. But I didn't say that because I'd learned that lesson too, that wanting things in this family made you vulnerable. So I left my mother's study and went back to my room, the room that used to be mine when I was a teenager, and I cried. I cried for my grandmother, who I missed so much it physically hurt sometimes. I cried for my marriage, which had been broken from the start but I'd tried so hard to fix. And I cried for Oliver, who deserved so much better than this family, this house, this life. But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't have possibly known, was that the necklace wasn't the real betrayal. The necklace was just the beginning. 3 weeks later, Oliver came home from school, upset. He was a quiet kid, sensitive, the kind of boy who brought home injured birds and cried at movies. He looked like his father. Unfortunately, the same dark hair and sharp features, but he had my eyes, my softness. I loved him so much it scared me sometimes. This feeling that I'd do anything, destroy anyone, to keep him safe. When I picked him up from Brightmont Academy that afternoon, he was quiet in the car, staring out the window instead of telling me about his day like he usually did. "What's wrong, baby?" I asked. He didn't answer for a long time, and when he finally did, his voice was small. "Aunt Natasha picked up Theo early today. She told my teacher that she was taking him to a doctor's appointment." Theo was Natasha's son, Oliver's cousin. 8 years old and everything Oliver wasn't. Loud, confident, athletic, mean. I'd seen him push Oliver down at Christmas, laugh when Oliver cried. And Natasha had just smiled like boys being boys was some kind of acceptable excuse. "Okay," I said slowly. "Why does that upset you?" Oliver turned to look at me and there were tears in his eyes. Because the teacher asked if Theo was sick and Aunt Natasha said, "No, it was just a checkup." But then she said something weird. She said, "We have to make sure he stays healthy. He's the only heir, after all." And the teacher laughed, "But Mom, what does that mean? Aren't I an heir too?" The word hit me like a punch to the stomach. Heir. Like this was some kind of monarchy. Like Theo was a prince and Oliver was nothing. I wanted to tell him it didn't mean anything, that his aunt was just being dramatic, but something about it felt wrong. It felt deliberate. "Don't worry about it, honey," I said, forcing my voice to stay light. "Aunt Natasha says silly things sometimes. You're just as important as Theo, I promise." But the question stayed with me, echoing in my head as I made dinner. As I helped Oliver with his homework, as I tucked him into bed. Why would Natasha say that? Why would she say it in front of his teacher, in front of Oliver's world? I waited until Oliver was asleep, and then I went downstairs. I found my mother and father in the library, my mother reading a book about French gardens, my father reviewing documents with his reading glasses perched on his nose. Natasha was there too, curled up on the leather sofa with a glass of wine, scrolling through her phone. It was like some kind of twisted Norman Rockwell painting. The perfect American family in their perfect American mansion. "I need to talk to you about something," I said. My mother sighed, this long-suffering sound like I was interrupting something important. "What is it, Laura?" I looked at Natasha. "Oliver told me you said something strange to his teacher today. You said Theo was the only heir. What did you mean by that?" Natasha didn't even have the grace to look embarrassed. She just shrugged. "I was talking about Dad's estate plan. Theo is listed as the primary beneficiary of the family trust when Dad passes. You know, because he's the oldest grandchild and his father is actually successful." The room went silent. I stared at my sister, then at my parents. What is she talking about? My father set down his papers and took off his glasses. And I knew from that gesture alone that whatever he was about to say was going to hurt. "Laura, your mother and I made some decisions about the family legacy last year." Given your circumstances, and given that Oliver's father is not exactly reliable, we thought it would be better to structure things differently. Theo will inherit the controlling shares of Pembroke Pharmaceuticals. Oliver will receive a trust fund, of course, but nothing like what Theo gets. It's about keeping the business in capable hands. I couldn't breathe. I literally could not get air into my lungs. You're cutting my son out of his inheritance because I divorced badly. My mother closed her book with a snap. We're being realistic, Laura. You've made poor choices your entire life. Your marriage was a disaster. You have no career. You contribute nothing to this family except drama. We're not cutting Oliver out. We're just being strategic about the future. Theo has two parents who are successful and stable. He's the better choice. The words hung in the air like poison. My sister was smiling now, this small, satisfied smile that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't just about money. This was about power, about winning, about making sure I stayed exactly where I'd always been, at the bottom of the family hierarchy. You're punishing my son for my mistakes, I said quietly. He's 7 years old. We're not punishing anyone, my father said. We're making sound financial decisions. You're being emotional, Laura. You always have been. This is why you can't be trusted with real responsibility. I looked at the three of them, these people who were supposed to love me, supposed to protect me and my child, and I saw the truth. I'd never mattered to them. Oliver had never mattered to them. We were extras in the story of the Pembroke family, supporting characters in Natasha's success story. And if I stayed in this house, if I let them keep treating us like we were disposable, Oliver would grow up believing he was worth less than his cousin, worth less than everyone. I couldn't let that happen, okay? I said. My voice was calm now, cold. I understand. Natasha looked surprised, like she'd expected more of a fight. My mother just looked relieved, like I was finally being reasonable. My father nodded and went back to his papers. None of them knew what I was really saying. None of them knew that in that moment I'd made a decision that would change everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Because what happened next? What happened at the dinner 2 months later? That's when things really fell apart. That's when I learned the truth about my family, about my grandmother's death, about the real reason they wanted me gone. That's when everything I thought I knew turned out to be a lie. Those 2 months were strange. I played the role they wanted me to play. Quiet, obedient, grateful. I thanked my mother for letting us stay. I complimented Natasha's new car. I told my father his decision made sense from a business perspective. I became invisible, which is exactly what they wanted. But while I was being invisible, I was also being smart. I started paying attention in ways I never had before. I started asking questions, quiet ones, casual ones, the kind that don't raise suspicions. I called my grandmother's nurse, the woman who'd been with her those last weeks in Newport, and took her to lunch. Her name was Patricia, and she was in her 50s, kind-faced and tired. I told her I was writing down memories of Grandma Eleanor, preserving her legacy. Patricia smiled and told me stories, beautiful ones about my grandmother's strength and humor. And then, almost casually, she told me something else. Your grandmother was sharp until the very end, you know, Patricia said. I know some families want to believe their loved ones were confused, but it makes the loss easier somehow. But Eleanor was completely lucid. She knew exactly what she wanted, especially about her will. She must have mentioned it a dozen times those last few days. About making sure you got the sapphires, about making sure Oliver was protected. She kept saying she needed to talk to her lawyer, that she needed to change something important. I set down my fork. Did she talk to her lawyer? Patricia frowned. You know, that's the strange thing. She called him several times, left messages. He never called back. And then she got worse so suddenly. The stroke came out of nowhere, and after that, she couldn't talk anymore. It was like she was trying to tell us something, but the words wouldn't come. She passed 3 days later. My hands were shaking again. Who was her lawyer? Same as your father's, I think. Some big firm downtown. But Laura, honey, you look pale. Are you okay? I told her I was fine, just emotional, missing my grandmother. I paid for lunch and went home, And that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Grandma Eleanor trying to call her lawyer, trying to change her will, and then suddenly having a stroke. It was probably nothing. Strokes happen to elderly people. But the timing felt wrong, and I couldn't stop thinking about my father's face when he told me about the estate plan, about how ready the answer had been, like he'd been preparing to say it for a long time. I started digging. Not obviously, not in ways anyone would notice. I used my mother's computer when she was at her Pilates class, searching through files, looking at emails. I found estate planning documents, old drafts of wills, correspondence with lawyers, and I found something else, something that made my blood run cold. There was an email chain between my mother and my father from a year ago, right after Grandma Eleanor died. The subject line was Eleanor's situation resolved. The email said, Vivian, the lawyer confirmed Eleanor never filed the new will. The stroke came just in time. Everything stays as we planned. Natasha's children will inherit everything through the original structure. Lara will never know what Eleanor wanted to do. Make sure you dispose of any recordings or notes from the nurse. We can't have this getting complicated. I read it 3 times, 4 times, trying to make the words mean something different than what they obviously meant. But there was no other interpretation. My parents had known my grandmother wanted to change her will. They'd known she wanted to protect Oliver and me, and they'd made sure it never happened. The stroke came just in time. Those words haunted me. Had they done something? Had they actually hurt my grandmother? Or had they just taken advantage of her stroke, made sure her lawyer never responded, made sure she died before she could protect me? Either way, they'd stolen my inheritance. They'd stolen Oliver's future. And they'd done it deliberately, coldly, without any remorse. I printed the email. I took photos of the documents. I saved everything to a hidden folder in the cloud. And then I started planning. I needed help. And I needed it from someone who understood how these people operated. I called an old friend from college, Monica, who'd become a lawyer specializing in estate litigation. We met at a coffee shop in Cambridge, far from anywhere my family would be. I showed her everything I'd found. She read through it all, her expression getting darker with each page. Lara, this is fraud, she said finally. If you can prove they interfered with your grandmother's attempts to change her will, if you can prove they knew about her intentions and deliberately prevented her from executing them, you have a case. A strong one. Can I win? I asked. Monica hesitated. Estate cases are complicated. Your family has money. They'll hire the best lawyers. It'll be ugly, and it'll take years. Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared for them to fight dirty? I thought about Oliver, about the way he'd looked when he asked if he was an heir to. I thought about my grandmother trying desperately to protect us, dying before she could. I thought about Natasha wearing those sapphires, my mother dismissing me like I was nothing, my father telling me I couldn't be trusted. Yeah, I said, I'm prepared. But I needed more than just the email. I needed proof of everything, needed to understand the full scope of what they'd done. So I kept digging, kept playing the perfect daughter while I searched for ammunition. And that's when I discovered the real secret, the one that made everything else look like small-time deception. I found it in my father's study in a locked drawer I broke into while everyone was at Natasha's son's birthday party. I'd stayed home claiming I had a migraine and spent 2 hours going through his files. There were investment documents, tax records, offshore account statements. And there was a folder labeled Julian Settlement. I opened it, confused. My divorce had been settled 2 years ago. Why would my father have documents about it? The answer was in a letter from my father's lawyer to Julian's lawyer, dated 6 months before I even filed for divorce. It laid out an offer. If Julian fought me for custody, if he made the divorce as difficult and expensive as possible, if he made sure I came out of it financially destroyed and emotionally broken, my father would pay him $2 million. And there was Julian's response, a single line, deal. The room spun. I had to sit down, had to breathe, had to process what I was reading. My father had paid my ex-husband to ruin me. Every lie Julian told in court, every nasty rumor he spread. Every penny he fought me for in that divorce set was all orchestrated by my own father. They'd work together to make sure I'd have to move back home, have to depend on my parents, have to be under their control. It was never about protecting the family legacy. It was about making sure I stayed powerless, making sure I stayed broken. I photographed everything, every document, every page, every piece of evidence. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the phone, but I got it all. And then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, locked the drawer, and went back to my room. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and I knew what I had to do. I had to leave. I had to take Oliver and get out of this house before they realized what I'd found. But I also had to be smart about it. If I ran, they'd use their money and power to take Oliver from me, claim I was unstable, claim I was kidnapping him. I needed a plan, needed to make sure that when I left with leverage. That's when I remembered something my grandmother used to say. Laura, the thing about powerful people is they always underestimate the quiet ones. They think silence means weakness, but sometimes silence is strategy. So I waited. I played my role, and I waited for the perfect moment. That moment came at a family dinner 2 weeks later, one of those forced gatherings my mother insisted on every month. We were all there. My parents at the head of the table, Natasha and Todd and Theo, me and Oliver. The dining room was perfect. As always, expensive flowers on the table, china that cost more than a car, wine that cost more than most people's monthly rent. We were having some kind of fish that probably required 3 people to prepare. And everyone was talking about Theo's acceptance into some prestigious summer program for gifted children. Oliver was quiet beside me, pushing food around his plate, and I could see the comparison happening in real time. Everyone treating Theo like he was special and Oliver like he was just there. That's when Natasha said it. She'd had too much wine, and she was feeling confident. And she looked right at Oliver and said, Theo got accepted because he's exceptional. Not everyone can be exceptional, though. Some people are just ordinary. She said it with a smile, like it was a compliment somehow. Like she was teaching Oliver a valuable lesson about knowing his place. Oliver's face crumpled. I saw it happen. Saw my baby boy realize that his own family thought he was less than, thought he was ordinary, thought he didn't matter. And something inside me broke. Not broke, like shattered. Broke like broke free. I stood up. Actually, Natasha, I need to tell you something. She looked surprised. Everyone did. I never made scenes. I never caused trouble. Oliver is exceptional. He's kind and empathetic and creative. And those are qualities your son will never have because you're raising him to be just like you, cruel and shallow and mean. The table went silent. My mother's face went white. My father started to stand. But I wasn't done. And while we're being honest, let's talk about the real reason you think Theo deserves everything. Let's talk about how you all decided to cut Oliver out of his inheritance because I'm the family embarrassment. Let's talk about how you knew Grandma wanted to change her will to protect us, and you made sure she never could. Let's talk about how Dad paid my ex-husband $2 million to destroy me in the divorce. I pulled out my phone and held it up. I have the emails. I have the documents. I have proof of everything, and I've already sent copies to my lawyer. My mother gasped. My father's face went purple. Natasha looked like I'd slapped her. You have no idea what you're talking about, my father said. Those documents are private, and you had no right to access them. And you had no right to steal my inheritance, I shot back. You had no right to manipulate my divorce. You had no right to treat my son like he's disposable. But here we are. I reached for Oliver's hand. He was staring at me with wide eyes, not understanding everything, but understanding enough. We're leaving tonight. And if you try to stop me, if you try to use your money and your lawyers to take my son from me, I will release every single document I've found to the press. I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of people you really are. I will destroy your reputation and your business and everything you've built on the backs of people you've manipulated and betrayed. My mother finally found her voice. "Your son is mentally sick," she said. "He's too sensitive, too weak. He'll never survive in the real world, and you're too damaged to raise him properly. You need us, Laura. Without this family, you're nothing." That's when Natasha laughed, that same dismissive laugh from the morning with the necklace. I said, "My son is the only heir. Leave this place or I'll kick you out." I looked at my mother, at my sister, at all of them. You know what? You're right. I'm leaving. But I'm not running away. I'm choosing to go. There's a difference. I took Oliver's hand and walked out of that dining room. I walked up the stairs to our rooms and I packed our bags, just the essentials, just enough to start over. Oliver helped, folded his clothes carefully, packed his favorite books. "Mom, where are we going?" he asked. "Somewhere better," I told him. "Somewhere where people love us for who we are, not for what we can give them." It took us about an hour. We carried our bags down the main staircase, past the living room where I could hear my parents arguing in harsh whispers, past the library where my father had told me I couldn't be trusted. We walked out the front door of that mansion, and I didn't look back. I drove us to Monica's house. She'd offered to let us stay while we figured things out, while we started the legal process of reclaiming what was mine. Oliver fell asleep in the car, exhausted from the emotional upheaval, and I carried him inside, tucked him into Monica's guest bed. "You did the right thing," Monica told me. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we fight," she said. "We take them to court. We expose everything. And we win." I wanted to believe her, but I also knew my family knew how ruthless they could be, knew they wouldn't just accept defeat. They'd come after me with everything they had, and I had to be ready. I spent that first night in Monica's guest room, lying awake, thinking about my grandmother, thinking about how she'd tried to protect me even when she was dying, thinking about how I'd failed her by being too blind to see what my family really was. But I also thought about Oliver, sleeping peacefully in the next room, finally away from people who made him feel small. And I thought about myself, about the woman I'd been in that house, quiet, compliant, invisibly the woman I was becoming now. Someone who fought back, someone who didn't accept cruelty as normal, someone who protected what mattered. 10 hours after we left that house, someone knocked on Monica's door. I answered it, expecting maybe a delivery or one of Monica's neighbors. Instead, I found my mother standing there, looking older than I'd ever seen her. Her perfect makeup smudged, her hands shaking. And behind her, 2 police officers. "Mrs. Pembroke says you took her grandson without permission." One of the officers said, "She's filed a report claiming possible parental kidnapping." My mother's face was triumphant, cold. This was her play. This was how they were going to win, by using the law to force me back, by making me look unstable and dangerous. I took a breath. This was it. This was the moment where I either crumbled or I stood firm. "Officers, I'm Oliver's mother. I have full legal custody. I didn't kidnap anyone. I moved out of a toxic living situation, which is my right as an adult and as a parent." I pulled out my phone and showed them the custody agreement, the documents proving Oliver was mine. My mother is upset because I discovered she and my father committed estate fraud and divorce manipulation. And I'm planning to file legal action. This is retaliation. The officers looked at my mother, then at me. One of them, a woman with tired eyes and gray hair, studied my face. "Ma'am, do you have proof of what you're claiming?" "I do," I said. "I have emails, financial records, everything. My lawyer has copies." The officer nodded slowly. "Then this is a civil matter, not criminal. Mrs. Pembroke, if your daughter has legal custody and hasn't violated any court orders, she has the right to live where she chooses." My mother's face went from triumphant to furious. "You don't understand. She's not stable. She's making up lies about her family. She needs help, and my grandson needs to be protected from her." The officer looked at me again. "Do you want to file a harassment report against your mother?" I probably should have. But in that moment, looking at my mother's desperate, angry face, I realized something. She was scared. They were all scared. Because for the first time in my life, I had power. I had information and evidence and the willingness to use it, and they knew they couldn't control me anymore. "No," I said quietly. "I don't want to file a report. I just want to be left alone. Tell my family that if they come near me or my son again without going through lawyers, I will release everything I found to the press. Tell them I'm done playing nice." The officers left. My mother stood there on Monica's doorstep. And for a second, I thought she might say something. Might apologize or beg or show some hint of the woman who used to read me bedtime stories when I was little. But she just turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the sidewalk. And I watched her get into her Mercedes and drive off. I closed the door and leaned against it, my whole body shaking. Monica came out of her office, where she'd been listening. "That was brave," she said. "That was terrifying," I corrected. "What if they keep coming? What if they find a way to take Oliver?" Monica put her hand on my shoulder. "Then we'll fight them. But Laura, you have to understand something. You already won the most important battle. You got out. Everything else is just details." But the details mattered. The details were everything. Because what I didn't know yet, what I wouldn't discover until later, was that my family's secrets went even deeper than estate fraud and divorce manipulation. There was something else, something darker. Something that would change everything I thought I knew about my grandmother's death and my place in this family. But I wouldn't learn that truth for another 3 weeks. And by then, everything would be different. By then, I'd understand exactly what I was fighting for and what I was fighting against. And by then, I'd be ready to finish what I'd started, to expose every lie, to claim every piece of justice I was owed. But that night, standing in Monica's hallway with my mother's car driving away and my son sleeping safely in the next room, I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that I'd taken the first step. I'd said no. I'd chosen myself and my child over their money and their manipulation. And whatever came next, whatever battles I'd have to fight, I'd fight them with my eyes open and my spine straight. Because I wasn't the family disappointment anymore. I wasn't the quiet one, the weak one, the one who didn't matter. I was the one who'd found the truth. And the truth, as my grandmother used to say, will set you free, even if it burns everything else down first. The lawsuit took 6 days to file. Monica worked around the clock, building our case, documenting every piece of evidence I'd found. We filed for a full investigation into my grandmother's estate, claiming undue influence and interference with testamentary intent. We also filed a separate civil suit against my father for his role in sabotaging my divorce. The documents were served to my parents on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, my phone had blown up with messages. Not from my family, they'd never contact me directly now that lawyers were involved, but from family friends, distant relatives, people I hadn't heard from in years. Everyone wanted to know what was happening, why I was suing my own parents. Didn't I understand how terrible this made the family look? I deleted every message. I didn't owe any of them explanations. Monica was right. We'd already won the most important battle. But what happened next, I never could have predicted. 3 days after we filed the lawsuit, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Usually, I let those go to voicemail, but something made me answer. A woman's voice, professional and careful, said, "Is this Laura Pembroke?" "Yes," I said. "Who is this?" "My name is Dr. Sarah Lindstrom. I was one of your grandmother Eleanor's physicians during her final year. I heard about your lawsuit through a colleague, and there's something I think you need to know. Can we meet?" My heart started pounding. "What is this about?" "I'd rather discuss it in person," she said. "I know this is unusual, but what I have to tell you could significantly impact your case. And frankly, it's been bothering me for over a year. I should have said something sooner, but I didn't have anyone to tell. Now you're asking the right questions, and I think you deserve answers." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop near Mass General the next morning. I brought Monica with me, both for legal protection and because I was honestly scared of what I might learn. Dr. Lindstrom was in her 40s, with short dark hair and an intense, intelligent face. She ordered nothing, just folded her hands on the table and looked at me with something like sympathy. "Your grandmother was my patient for about 8 months before she passed," she began. "She came to me because she was having minor cardiovascular issues. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but concerning given her age. We put her on medication, monitored her closely. She was responding well. Her prognosis was actually quite good for someone her age. I felt cold. Then why did she have a stroke?" Dr. Lindstrom pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "These are copies of her medical records from those final weeks. I made them before I left Mass General last year, moved to a different hospital. I kept them because something about her case never sat right with me. Look at the medication log from her last week alive." I opened the folder with shaking hands. Monica leaned in, both of us scanning the detailed notes. There were timestamps, dosages, notes from nurses, and there, highlighted in yellow by Dr. Lindstrom's careful hand, was something that made my blood run cold. 3 days before my grandmother's stroke, someone had changed her medication. The prescription for her blood pressure medicine had been altered, doubled without any medical justification. And the change had been authorized by someone who wasn't her primary physician. Who changed this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "That's what bothered me," Dr. Lindstrom said. "The authorization came through your father. He called the hospital, said he'd spoken with Eleanor's cardiologist, said the doctor wanted to increase the dosage. I wasn't there that day. I was at a conference. The nurse on duty accepted it because your father was listed as her healthcare proxy. But when I got back and reviewed the charts, I was confused. I called the cardiologist. He said he never authorized any change. He said Eleanor's dosage was exactly where it should be." Monica's hand found mine under the table. "Are you saying the increased dosage caused her stroke?" "I'm saying it dramatically increased the risk," Dr. Lindstrom said carefully. "For someone her age, with her specific condition, doubling that particular medication could absolutely trigger a stroke. And the timing 3 days later is consistent." I flagged it in my notes. "I tried to bring it up with the administration, but your father is a major donor to the hospital. I was told it was probably a miscommunication, that these things happen, that suggesting anything else would be career-ending. So I let it go. But it's haunted me. And when I heard about your lawsuit, I knew I had to tell you." I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. My father had changed my grandmother's medication. My father had caused her stroke. Not accidentally, not through some misunderstanding, but deliberately, to stop her from changing her will. He'd killed her. My own father had killed his mother to preserve his control over the family fortune. "Can we use this?" Monica asked Dr. Lindstrom. "Can this be entered as evidence?" "I'm risking my career by even talking to you," Dr. Lindstrom said. "But yes, I'll testify if it comes to that. What your family did to Eleanor, what they did to you, it's wrong. Someone has to stand up and say that." I looked at the papers in front of me, at the proof of my father's crime, and I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about money anymore. This wasn't just about inheritance or fairness or protecting Oliver. This was about justice for my grandmother. For the woman who'd loved me when no one else in that family did. For the woman who'd tried to save me and died trying. "We need to go to the police," I said. Monica nodded grimly. "We do. This is beyond civil litigation now. This is criminal." The next week was a nightmare. We took Dr. Lindstrom's evidence to the district attorney's office. They opened an investigation. My father was questioned. The hospital launched its own internal review. And the media found out. Suddenly, the Pembroke family was all over the news, not as philanthropists and business leaders, but as suspects in a potential elder abuse and wrongful death case. I had to keep Oliver away from the television, away from the internet, away from anything that would let him see headlines about his grandfather. Being investigated for killing his great-grandmother, Monica moved us to a temporary rental in Brookline, somewhere my family couldn't find us easily. Somewhere Oliver could just be a kid for a while. But even there, the case followed us. My phone never stopped ringing. Reporters, lawyers, claiming to be long-lost relatives who suddenly wanted to share their stories about the terrible Pembroke family. I ignored all of them, except one. The call came from a woman named Helen Richardson. She said she used to be my grandmother's estate attorney before she'd been fired and replaced by my father's lawyer 15 years ago. "Your grandmother tried to contact me," Helen said when I finally called her back, about 2 months before she died. "She left me voicemail saying she needed to change her will, that she was worried about your father's influence, that she wanted to make sure you and your son were protected." I called her back, but every time I did, someone else answered. Usually, your mother. She said Eleanor was resting, that she'd been confused lately, that she'd call me back but never did. I should have pushed harder. I should have driven to Newport myself. But I was busy with other cases, and your mother was so convincing about Eleanor's declining state. I believed her. And then Eleanor died, and I figured it was too late. My hands were shaking again, always shaking now. "My mother blocked you from talking to Grandma." "I believe so," Helen said. "And I think your father fired me all those years ago because I wouldn't structure the estate the way he wanted it. He wanted everything under his control." I told Eleanor she should maintain independent control of at least some of her assets, to create trusts for her grandchildren that he couldn't touch. She was considering it. And then suddenly I was fired, told my services were no longer needed. I always wondered what happened after that. Now I know. This was the piece I'd been missing. This was proof that my parents had been planning this for years. Isolating my grandmother, controlling access to her, making sure no one could help her protect me. They'd been systematic about it, patient, willing to play the long game. And when Grandma Eleanor finally tried to break free, tried to change things, they'd stopped her in the most permanent way possible. "Will you testify?" I asked Helen about what happened, about why you were fired, about the voicemails. "I will," she said. "Your grandmother deserves that. And so do you." With Helen's testimony and Dr. Lindstrom's medical evidence, the district attorney's case against my father solidified. 3 weeks after I'd walked out of that mansion with Oliver, my father was arrested and charged with criminally negligent homicide and elder abuse. The bail was set at $5 million, which he paid immediately, but the damage was done. The Pembroke name was destroyed. My father's business partners started distancing themselves. Investors pulled out. The charity boards my mother sat on quietly asked her to resign. Natasha's husband filed for divorce, apparently deciding that being married to a family under criminal investigation was bad for his career. And through it all, felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even sadness. Just this hollow exhaustion, this bone-deep weariness from carrying the weight of my family's sins. Oliver asked me one night while I was tucking him in, "Mom, why did Grandpa hurt Great-Grandma?" I'd told him a simplified version that Grandpa had made a bad choice that hurt someone we loved. But he was smart, my boy, and he'd picked up more than I thought. "I don't know, baby," I said, honestly. "Sometimes people care more about money and power than they care about being good. And that's the saddest thing in the world." Oliver was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm glad we left." "Me too," I told him. And I meant it. Despite everything, despite the pain and the fear and the endless legal battles, I was glad, because we were free. We were finally free. The trial took 8 months. I testified about finding the emails, about the pattern of control and manipulation. Dr. Lindstrom testified about the medication change. Helen testified about being blocked from accessing my grandmother. Nurse Patricia testified about Grandma Eleanor's desperate attempts to change her will. And my father sat there in his expensive suit, flanked by his lawyers, looking like the victim somehow. Like we were all out to destroy an innocent man. The jury didn't buy it. They deliberated for 6 hours and came back with a guilty verdict on all counts. My father was sentenced to 12 years in prison. He'd appeal, of course. His lawyers were already filing the paperwork. But the conviction stood. He was going to jail. My mother wasn't charged criminally, but the civil case against both of them proceeded separately. With the criminal conviction as evidence, Monica said our chances of winning were excellent. And then something unexpected happened. 2 weeks after my father's sentencing, I got a letter. Not from a lawyer or a reporter, but from my mother. It was handwritten, 3 pages long, and it started with the words I never thought I'd read. "Laura, I'm sorry." I almost threw it away without reading further. But something made me continue. And what I found in those pages was the closest thing to truth my mother had ever given me. She wrote about growing up poor, about marrying my father for his money and his promise of a better life. She wrote about how she'd slowly lost herself in that world. How she'd become the kind of person who valued status over everything, including her own children. She wrote about being afraid, always afraid. That if she didn't play by my father's rules, she'd lose everything and end up back where she started. "I know this doesn't excuse what I did," she wrote. "I know I hurt you and Oliver in ways I can never take back. I let your father convince me that you were weak, that you needed to be controlled for your own good. But the truth is, I was the weak one. I was the one who couldn't stand up to him, who went along with his plans, who looked the other way when I knew things were wrong. I stole your inheritance. I let him hurt your grandmother. I let him destroy your marriage. And I will live with that guilt for the rest of my life." The letter ended with an offer. She would testify on my behalf in the civil case, provide any documentation I needed, and sign over her portion of the estate without a fight. In exchange, she asked for nothing, except maybe, someday, if I could find it in myself, to let her see Oliver. "Not now," she wrote. "Not until he was old enough to understand and decide for himself. But someday." I put the letter down and cried. Not because I forgave Hai, wasn't sure I ever could, but because it was the first time anyone in my family had admitted the truth. The first time someone had chosen honesty over self-preservation. Monica helped me draft a response. I told my mother I would accept her testimony and her cooperation with the civil case. I told her that I appreciated her apology, even if I wasn't ready to forgive. And I told her that, yes, someday, when Oliver was older and if he wanted to, I would let them have a relationship. But it would be on Oliver's terms, not hers. She wrote back one more time, just 2 words. "Thank you." The civil case settled 4 months later, with my mother's cooperation and the criminal conviction as evidence. My father's lawyers advised him to accept a settlement rather than risk a trial. The terms were staggering. Oliver and I would receive the entirety of my grandmother's original estate, including the properties in Newport and Boston, the investment portfolio, and yes, the sapphire necklace. We'd also receive compensation for the emotional distress and the fraudulent manipulation of my divorce. The total came to approximately $40 million. Natasha was cut out entirely, her previous inheritance redirected to Oliver. The family business was to be sold, with proceeds split between various charities my grandmother had supported. My father would have nothing. He'd spend his prison sentence knowing he'd destroyed everything he'd built. All because he couldn't stand to give me what I was owed. The day the settlement was finalized, Monica opened a bottle of champagne in her office. "You won," she said. "You actually won." But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like surviving. I sold the Boston mansion immediately. I couldn't imagine ever living there again. Couldn't imagine walking those halls without seeing my father's face, my mother's cold dismissal, Natasha's cruel smile. I kept the Newport property, though, the house where my grandmother had spent her last summers. I thought maybe Oliver and I could make new memories there, could fill it with love instead of manipulation. We used some of the settlement money to start a foundation in my grandmother's name, focused on protecting elderly people from financial abuse and providing legal support to families fighting estate fraud. If Grandma Eleanor's death had to mean something, I wanted it to mean that other people might be saved from what happened to her. Dr. Lindstrom joined our board of directors. So did Nurse Patricia. Helen Richardson became our legal counsel. We built something good out of something terrible. Oliver adjusted slowly. He started therapy, working through his feelings about his grandfather, about his family, about everything that had happened. He had nightmares sometimes, would wake up crying, asking if the bad people could find us. I'd hold him and promise him we were safe. that no one could hurt us anymore. And gradually, month by month, he started to believe it. He started to smile more, started to make friends at his new school, a progressive place in Brookline where nobody cared about old money or family names. Started to just be a kid. One afternoon, about a year after everything fell apart, he came to me with a question. Mom, do you think Grandpa loved us? Even a little. I thought about how to answer that. I could have lied, could have said yes to protect him. But I'd learned the hard way that lies, even kind ones, cause more damage than truth. I think your grandpa loved power more than he loved people, I said carefully. And that's a kind of sickness, honey. It doesn't mean you're not lovable. It means he was broken in a way that made him unable to love properly. Does that make sense? Oliver nodded slowly. I think I feel sorry for him, he said. Is that weird? No, I told him. That means you're a better person than he ever was. That means you have empathy, and that's the most important thing in the world. He hugged me then, this fierce, tight hug that reminded me why I'd fought so hard. This boy, this beautiful, sensitive, kind boy, was worth every battle. Every sleepless night, every moment of fear and pain. As long as he was okay, as long as he grew up knowing he was loved and valued and worthy, then everything I'd been through mattered. I ran into Natasha once, about 18 months after the trial. I was at a bookstore in Cambridge with Oliver, and she was there with Theo. We locked eyes across the store. And for a moment, I thought she might say something, but she just turned away, grabbed Theo's hand, and left. I heard later that she'd moved to California, was working as a consultant, had changed her last name. Her divorce had been finalized. And she'd gotten far less than she expected because Todd's lawyers had been better than hers. I didn't take pleasure in her downfall, but I didn't feel sorry for her either. She'd made her choices. We all had. As for my father, I never visited him in prison. I got occasional letters from him, always the same thing. Protests of his innocence, claims that he'd only been trying to protect the family. Accusations that I'd destroyed everything out of spite. I threw them away without reading past the first paragraph. I didn't need his justification. I didn't need his version of events. I knew the truth. My mother, true to her word, stayed away. But she sent birthday cards to Oliver, simple ones with just her signature. And she donated to the foundation every year. Anonymous contributions that I only knew about because Helen flagged them for me. It was something. Not redemption, but acknowledgement. Not forgiveness, but responsibility. Maybe that was the best any of us could do. 3 years after I walked out of that mansion with my son, I opened an art gallery in the South End. It was something I'd always wanted to do. Back when I was young and believed I could have dreams. The space was small but beautiful, high ceilings and good light. And I featured artists who reminded me of myself, people who'd been told they weren't good enough, weren't important enough, weren't worth the investment. We had an opening night party. It was crowded with people who'd supported me through everything, Monica and Dr. Lindstrom and Patricia and Helen, along with new friends I'd made in the aftermath. Oliver ran around with a group of kids, laughing and carefree, and I stood in the center of my gallery surrounded by art and friendship and possibility. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, not happiness exactly, not yet. The wounds were still too fresh, the memories still too painful. But peace. The knowledge that I'd done the right thing, that I'd protected my son, that I'd honored my grandmother's memory. The knowledge that I'd refused to let them break me. Monica found me near the end of the night as things were winding down. Your grandmother would be proud, she said. I felt tears prick my eyes. I hope so. I really hope so. She would be, Monica insisted. You fought for the truth. You fought for justice. You fought for your son. That's what she wanted for you all along. To see you strong and free and living the life you deserved. I looked around at my gallery, at Oliver's drawing hanging in a place of honor on the wall, at all the evidence of the life I'd built from the ashes of my old one. You know what the funny thing is? Said. They tried so hard to make me nothing. They tried to erase me, to control me, to make me disappear. But all they did was show me who I really was. They showed me I was stronger than they ever gave me credit for. And now I'm here, and they're not. And I did that. I saved myself. Monica smiled. Exactly right. You saved yourself, and now you get to live. She was right. I did get to live. Oliver and I traveled that summer, went to Europe, saw art and architecture and beauty. He was 9 now, still sensitive but more confident, starting to understand what we'd been through and why it mattered. We talked about it sometimes, about family and loyalty and what happens when the people who are supposed to love you hurt you instead. I think the moral of the story, Oliver said one night in Paris, as we ate crepes and watched people pass by, is that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up for you, who protects you, who tells you the truth even when it's hard. That's exactly the moral, I told him. You're a very smart kid, you know that? He grinned. I get it from my mom. And maybe that was the real revenge, the best revenge, better than any lawsuit or criminal conviction. They tried to tell Oliver he was ordinary, that he didn't matter, that he'd never be as good as his cousin. And instead, he'd grown into this incredible person, this boy who understood empathy and justice and kindness. He'd become everything they weren't. And he'd done it because I'd gotten him away from them, because I'd shown him there was a different way to live. That was my victory. Not the money, although financial security was nice. Not the public humiliation of my family, although I won't lie and say it didn't feel justified. But the fact that Oliver was okay, the fact that he was happy, the fact that he knew his worth on our last night in Paris. I took Oliver to the top of the Eiffel Tower. We looked out over the city. All those lights spreading out in every direction, and I thought about how far we'd come. Mom, Oliver said, do you ever wish things had been different? That our family had been normal. I thought about it. You know what? No, I don't. Because if things had been different, we might have stayed in that house. We might have kept pretending everything was fine. And you might have grown up believing them when they said you were ordinary. This way, you know the truth. You know your value. And that's worth everything. He leaned against me, and we stood there watching the lights. And I knew that whatever happened next, whatever challenges we still had to face, we'd face them together. We'd face them free. The story of my family was a tragedy. But the story of me and Oliver, that was something else entirely. That was a story of survival, of courage, of refusing to accept the role they'd written for us. That was a story of a mother who loved her son enough to burn her entire world down to keep him safe. That was a story of justice, earned through pain, but earned nonetheless. And if there's a moral to all of this, if there's something I want people to understand, it's this. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you will hurt you worse than anyone else ever could. Sometimes family is the most dangerous place to be. But you don't have to accept that. You don't have to stay. You don't have to let them convince you that you're worthless or weak or wrong. You can fight back. You can find the truth. You can build something better. It won't be easy. There will be nights when you question everything, when you wonder if you made a mistake, when you're so tired you can barely stand. But on the other side of that fight is freedom. And freedom, real freedom, is worth any price. My grandmother knew that. She tried to give it to me, and when she couldn't, I took it for myself. I took it for Oliver. I took it for every person who's ever been made to feel small by someone who was supposed to lift them up. 5 years after I walked out of that mansion, my father was released from prison on parole. He'd served 7 years of his 12-year sentence, got out early for good behavior. I heard about it through Monica, who still kept track of such things just to make sure I was never surprised. Do you want protection? She asked. A restraining order? Security? Anything. I thought about it. Thought about the man who'd killed his own mother for money, who'd destroyed my marriage for control, who'd tried to make his grandson feel worthless. And I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. No, I said. He's nothing to me now. He's just a man who made terrible choices and paid for them. He can't hurt us anymore, and he couldn't, because I built a life he couldn't touch, surrounded by people who actually loved us, supported by work that mattered and money that was legally mine. Oliver was 12 now, about to start middle school. talking about becoming a lawyer like Monica or maybe a doctor like Dr. Lindstrom. He wanted to help people, he said. Wanted to make sure bad things didn't happen to good people. My father tried to contact me once after his release. A letter delivered through his lawyer asking if we could meet. Asking if I'd consider letting him see Oliver, his only grandson. I wrote back 3 words. No, stay away. I never heard from him again. And that was fine. That was perfect, actually. Because the best revenge isn't about punishment or pain. The best revenge is building a life so good, so full. So genuinely happy that the people who tried to destroy you become irrelevant. They become a footnote in your story instead of the whole plot. That's what Oliver and I did. We made them irrelevant. The gallery thrived. I curated shows, discovered new artists, became part of a community that valued creativity and authenticity over money and status. Oliver excelled in school, made real friends, joined the debate team. We went to therapy, both separately and together, working through the trauma, making sure it didn't define us, and sometimes on quiet nights. I'd take out the sapphire necklace my grandmother wanted me to have. I never wore it. It felt too connected to everything that had happened, but I'd hold it. Remember her? Whispered thank you into the darkness. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for trying to save me. Thank you for giving me the strength to save myself. I'd tell her about Oliver, about how amazing he was turning out to be. I'd tell her about the foundation, about all the people we'd helped. I'd tell her that her death wasn't in vain, that it meant something, that it changed everything. And I'd like to think wherever she was, she knew. She knew I'd won. She knew we were okay. She knew the truth had come out and justice had been served. Not perfect justice, because nothing in this world is perfect, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough to mean something. That's the end of my story. Or maybe it's just the beginning of a new one, a better one. One I get to write myself without interference or manipulation or someone else's agenda. Either way, I'm here. Oliver's here. We're safe, we're loved, we're free. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It means more than you think. I appreciate every one of you for being here. So don't forget to subscribe. The next story is already on its way. Until then, stay safe and believe in yourself.